Well, there's been a great deal said about the amount of saloons we've had in Rossland here. There was a good deal of saloons, and we had two or three breweries here. The first one, I believe, was up on the end of Sourdough Alley there at the Gulch. I don't remember it. Remember the foundations of it there, and I inquired about it when I was a boy, and they told me that that's where Spud Murphy made his liquor. So, but I do remember the other two breweries, the Lion Brewery, which I don't think run too long. It was situated up on the top end of town, I guess northeast of town, you'd say. And the Leroy Brewery, it was situated down here on Leroy Avenue, which run for a good many years. And in fact, I think it run until Prohibition. It was quite a brewery, and they did ship out a lot of beer out of here. They all claimed it was good beer on account of the good water we had up here in Rossland, which we've always been proud of. One thing I do remember about it is there used to be a tap, came out the cooler, and men going home from work used to stop in there sometimes and have a glass of beer. Probably some people think that's funny. They would probably create a lot of people going around there, but it didn't. The beer was so cold that if you had one glass of it, why, you couldn't drink any more. It was too cold to drink. But some of the fellows used to go down there. One fellow, he had a big family, and he used to call in there every day. And they didn't seem to object to it. They wasn't the amount of beer they drunk, nor they wasn't in the way, because the cooler was situated on the bottom floor of the brewery, and there was nothing there except this tap and a glass there. Fellow used to come in the back door, have a drink, and go back out again. Now, saloons, I don't exactly know how many saloons there were here in the early days, that is ahead of my time. But I could count off between 25 and 30 that was in operation when I was a boy. The big thing I used to remember about it is that my dad used to send me down sometime with a lard pail to pick it up from the St. Charles Hotel, 10 cents worth of beer. And the bartender would tell you to stay outside. He'd go put the beer in the can, put the lid on, give it to you, and you'd give him the 10 cents, and away you went. And there used to be a delivery from the brewery, and if you wanted a keg of beer, why, you put out your empty keg by the gate. The brewery come around twice a week delivering. If you saw your keg outside, well, you drop a full one off and pick the other one up, and you paid for it at the end of the month. Well, this keg of beer, I think, held 4 gallons, and some had pumps for it to pump it out the barrel. Some just had these here little taps that fitted in there. But there was a lot of beer drunk here. An awful lot of people drunk beer, but still I don't think there was any worse than it is today. In fact, I don't think it is as bad as it is today. Very seldom ever seen a drunk, so today, why, you see plenty of them. And, of course, they didn't have the car to jump into and break the necks. So that was the way they... Oh, yes, we also had 2 liquor stores here. One was run by a fellow called Dan Thomas, which was located on First Avenue. And the other was a fellow called Owens. Well, I know my parents used to go in there sometimes. My dad did, and he'd buy a bottle of whiskey for $1. That is, taking out the bulk. Or you could buy a name brand for $1.25, like 3-Star Hennessy brandy. You could buy that for $1.25. And the flask, or the Mickey as we call it today, why, you could get one of those refilled for 25 cents. But there wasn't too much of that drunk. I suppose there was because there's two liquor stores here. I imagine there probably was, but there was very seldom anybody that was intoxicated that couldn't handle themselves. Anyway, they tell me that in the early days here that there was around 45 or 50 saloons here. I have heard as many as 60 some odd saloons, but I was just counting up the other day, roughly in my mind here, and I could figure out about 25. Now, some I might have missed, but those are the one I knew was in operation when I was a boy here. The railway seemed to do very good here in the early days. The Great Northern, it went out here at 10 o'clock in the morning and used to come back about 4 o'clock in the evening. To give her an idea just how fast these trains were, why, as kids we used to go down Sheep Creek fishing down towards Patterson, and we generally used to leave home about the time that the train was coming. Well, I wasn't very big then, and there was one spot there where the train used to really get down and puff and snort, and that was above Garnet Andrews Ranch. It is the present day. And we used to wait on the side there now, where the engineer used to slow it down a little more, I don't know, but us kids used to run and jump on the last car there, grab onto the railings of the step on the back coach, climb up on that. And then it got a little further away, it used to pick up speed again and seemed to go ahead much easier. But the conductor and them was good to kids. They'd come out there and kind of throw a bit of a scare into you. Then they'd tell you to come inside and sit down because you might fall off. And the CPR, they had two trains in and out here a day. One train used to go out 6 in the morning and used to come in just after 3 in the afternoon. This I remember quite vividly because there was two stations here, one at Union Avenue down by Cook Avenue School. The other, of course, was up the top of the town. And well, what we used to do on that is put your hand up in school and ask to leave the room and dart off down to the to the station and ride the train up to the top station. This used to be a general thing. And then there used to be a train went out at 4 o'clock and it came back at midnight. In the meantime, why, there was freight trains and ore trains run off of both railways during the day, so that the CPR and the Great Northern kept things going around here. It was nice to hear the old trains coming in, blowing the whistles and going out again. One big feature used to be everybody used to go up to meet the trains and see who came in town and who went out. Used to always be quite a crowd up there to see this go on. So that was quite a busy part of our lives here in the early days, especially as kids. Now there was one thing that used to be quite amusing to us and probably created quite a bit of curiosity to a kid was the Chinaman. There's very little been said about the Chinaman around Rossland, or what I have heard, but as a boy here, why, there were about 300 Chinamen here in Rossland. These, I believe, was brought in by the CPR when the CPR is putting the tracks through. They was brought in for laborers on the railway construction. And later on, why, they dropped off at these towns and brought in more Chinamen, started different things around the town. There was quite a bunch of Chinamen worked on the railway here as section men. In fact, anybody could get a job on the section here. That was one of the first jobs a fellow got, was on the section working for $1 a day till you found something that was a little better. But Chinatown itself was quite a little town of itself. It was actually, it was where the first station of Rossland was located until they built the station higher up and moved it. There must have been about 10 or 15 stores there and a big josh house. This was quite a curious thing to me. I was always scared to death to sneak in there and look, but I always used to look around at it and hope that I could get in there to have a look inside. But the Chinamen, they were quite patient with kids and was pretty good. Oh, there were a few of them that didn't like you around, but the majority of Chinamen was pretty good. They had, what we'd call our drugstore, I guess. One store, it sold pretty near nothing but herbs and Chinese medicine and things like that. And the stores were very drab. They was probably a light hanging down from on a piece of wire from the roof or ceiling. And then all these here parcels was generally wrapped up in matting. It was made in China. The rice was all imported. It was in these bags, these matted bags, going. And then, of course, there was a lot of laundries. And then there was the general store down there. And there was a Masonic building there. It all used to have the Masonic emblem on it, and it was written across the top, Masonic Temple. Now, this store used to be a general merchandise store for the Chinamen, and they kept quite a lot of stuff. We used to go down there quite often to buy firecrackers, which sold for 5 cents a package, and they'd give you a punk with it to burn when you lighted the firecrackers. And the Chinamen there, they used to be drinking their own liquor. They must have imported their own liquor because it was a different brand of what the men around here used to drink, and they used to have it in little saucers they used to drink out of. It wasn't like our cups or anything like that. They was Chinese dishes. But we used to watch them as kids, and there used to always be a bunch of Chinamen in there playing fan-tan with these big dominoes. And they had these things we used to play with when we was kids for learning to count. Oh, they used to chatter away there in Chinese, and that used to amuse us quite a bit. And then there was the Chinese laundries. There was, there's just as many Chinese laundries around town as there was saloons. These Chinamen would come up the hotel and pick up the laundry from the different boarders in the hotels, take them away and wash them and then bring them back next day. Well, they would. I used to hear even the women say that nobody could wash a shirt, a white shirt, and iron it like a Chinaman. Because I've heard it so many times when I was a youngster. And there used to be one laundry where I used to go to school down at the lower end of town here at Cook Avenue still. We used to have to go by it every day. And the Chinese used to be in there, and they had the long pigtails, and some would be sitting smoking, some would be ironing. They used to have a pot-bellied stove there with all these irons round, and what used to amuse me more than anything else was these fellows smoking. They had big, long bamboo pipes, and they must have been filled with water because they used to gurgle every time they used to suck a puff of smoke through it. Well, then there were some other pipes which were long stem pipe and had a little brass bowl on. It didn't seem to hold much tobacco, but they used to keep putting it into it. The bunks of the Chinamen, they didn't have mattresses like we did. They just slept right on the hard boards. So it was a pretty rough place for the Chinamen, I believe. And then there was the Chinese restaurants and Chinese cooks. They was getting promoted when they got up in that stage. They was the aristocracy of the Chinese. And then there was the woodcutters. there used to be a Chinaman called Mark Ann. And he had a crew of, I guess, about 25 or 30 Chinamen cutting wood. They tell me that the Chinaman that he had there used to get about half a cent a day or a quarter cent a day. He'd bring them in, they couldn't talk English, and he'd learn them to talk English, and they used to cut wood. And then, of course, when they got to talking English, why, then they would go into laundry business or some other business or go cutting wood on their own. There used to be a lot of Chinamen going around town sawing wood. Practically the whole town burnt wood them days, and in fact our home, why, we used to go out in the winter time and cut about 20 cords of wood and haul it home and let it dry for the summer. And a Chinaman would come around there and he would ask if he could saw the wood. You say, how much? He'd say $1. Oh, that's too much, that's too much. I think I saw him myself. I saw him for 75 cents. Oh, you'd probably give him the contract to saw the wood for 25 cents. He'd saw about a cord and a half a day. Now they packed their own sawhorse and their own bucksaw. They used to keep it pretty sharp, and they could really go through the cordwood pretty fast. Well, then there was a lot of Chinamen that used to hire out as cooks for private homes. These Chinamen used to work for about $15, $25, or $30 a month, depending on who they worked for and the board. And they would look after the house and do the cooking for some of the people around town here. So the Chinamen, oh yes, and then you could hire a Chinaman to dig over your garden. There was an unemployment place down there for the Chinaman. And, if you wanted a Chinese boy, you went down there and told them to send you one out, and they'd send you one out. He'd work for $1 a day. He'd turn over your garden or do everything that you wanted. And then, of course, we had the Chinese gardeners here, which was many of them. Each Chinaman seemed to have his little district to go into, and they'd come around with the pole across the back and 2 baskets on. They all seemed to have a little quick step with them when they walked with these baskets. I guess it's on account of keeping the baskets balanced. I used to try to pick up those baskets when I was a young fella, but I couldn't. They was too heavy for me, and I imagined that they probably weigh about 75 to 100 pounds apiece. Well, the Chinaman, he used to get out with the first vegetables that was in town, such as carrots and radishes and lettuce and things like that. The grocery stores in them days didn't carry that stuff. If you wanted any fresh vegetables, why, you got it off the Chinaman. So that there was quite a bunch of them, and you'd probably see a dozen chinks, we used to call them, going along the street. They never walked on the sidewalk, they walked out in the street. And they was always in a row. They never walked abreast of each other, whether they was packing anything or whether they was just walking. They used to always be behind each other about 10 paces, and they was chattering away in Chinese. This used to be a very common sight. And then on Chinese New Year, why, the Chinaman used to bring, we call it Chinese lily. He'd give her a Chinese lily. He'd give her a Chinese lily to you on Chinese New Year to all his customers. And he'd probably give the kids a couple of packages of firecrackers. This used to be quite an event on Chinese New Year. And then there was another thing that used to be curious to me was when a Chinaman died, they buried him up in one corner of the cemetery. And we used to go up there to look at these graves, and the Chinaman used to put, when they bury a fellow, they put maybe a roast of pork on there, and vegetables and things like that for the Chinaman to eat from the next world, I guess it was. And there used to be some of these little Chinese dishes, and there's probably something in them, I don't know. They probably, animals took them away, I don't know. But anyway, these used to be on the graves. And I remember one fellow, he asked the Chinaman, he says, when do you think your Chinaman friend's going to come up to eat that? And the Chinaman responded, well, he said, about the same time your wife come up to smell those flowers you're putting on there. But anyway, they must dug all those graves up, because I was down there and sometime when I got older, and The graves had all been dug up there, and there was just the handles and remains of the caskets left there. And somebody told me that they dug them up every so often and shipped the remains back to China for a Chinese burial. But that's all I know about. I knew they had been dug up and moved from there, and today, why, I don't think you could hardly find where the Chinaman was buried in. But they told me that they used to dig them up every 20 years, I believe it was told me, and they used to hire a boat and ship all the remains of the Chinaman back from Canada back to China to be buried in China. Well, one thing we used to listen to with the Chinaman was their orchestra. This was really something to listen to that. It was quite amusing because the instruments were different, the sound was different. It reminded me much of the bagpipes, although there was no bagpipe used. There was a reed instrument they used with a horn on it. It wasn't like a saxophone. Probably that's where the saxophone originated from. It was just a tapered horn. That was all that was on the end of it. Now, just how they got the notes out of it, I don't know. They probably could have had some way of fingering it higher up. And then they had well, I don't think you'd call it a violin because they didn't put it under the chin. They had an instrument there with one string on, and it had quite a long neck to it, the fingerboard. And the bow, instead of being played on top, was played underneath the string. There's several of these things that they played, and we used to have quite an orchestra of them, probably 4 or 5 of them be playing. And I guess the music was all right to them. Why, they seemed to get a big kick out of it, but to me, why, it was an awful sounding thing. But still, it used to amuse us kids, and we used to stand there by the hours watching them and listening to them play these instruments. So that was the life of the Chinaman here in Rossland as I knew it. There was quite a few characters in Rossland, the same as any other town. Now, we had Kirkup. He was a well-known figure here. He was here for quite a long time. He was our first sheriff here. Later on, worked in the courthouse as recorder of claims and things like that. Everybody knew Kirkup. He was a big man, and you want to make trouble with him, why, he was always ready for it. And then, of course, we had Alice Jessie we called her, who lived in a shack out the west side of Rossland. Well, she was quite a character, and used to terrify us kids when we used to go by there, because we used to tease her to start with. Looking back at her, well, it was kind of hard to describe what she looked like, but the closest thing I can describe her as looking like is like Phyllis Diller. Yeah, so boy, she was quite a character. She'd pick up anything around town, and she was well noted for her cats. She had about 20 cats there. And used to go around the butcher stores every day, make her rounds and pick up the scraps from the butcher store that the butchers had cut off the meat they didn't want. I remember one time she went into P. Burns's, and in them days they used to keep the fish in the window in ice there. They had that tank in the window, used to keep the fish there and cover it with ice. And this day there was a lot of smelts there, these small fish. And she was chatting away to the butcher there, I think his name was Cadden. And she was putting these here small fish into a pocket. Now she was putting them in, they was going through a hole in the pocket and dropping on the sawdust. Finally, Cadden says to her, "By golly, Jess, I think you got a hole in your pocket." She looked down and seen the fish on the floor, and she took off. She used to make her daily rounds through the alleys to see what the stores had put out, and that's about all she lived on, was what she picked up from the stores at the back there that they were throwing out for garbage. I remember going home from work one day when I was a little older, and she had a foot up on the saw bucking wood, and the back of her dress was wide open, and rear end was sticking out the back of it. She was quite a Jess. She, one day I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning, heard quite a racket. I looked out the front window and here Jess was coming down the road rolling a barrel. And inside the barrel she had a bunch of old lard pails. She rolled that the whole length of the street to get home, but then everybody, I think, on the street was looking out the window to see what was going on. She was the character here, all right. Another time, why, she got a skunk in the house. And she tried to get the skunk out. She couldn't get it out, so she got a couple of boys to get it out for her. By the time the boys got through, they'd killed the skunk, and they couldn't get in themselves. So she came out, and she dropped it in the creek. And then, of course, you could smell it all over town then. It was floating down, and finally one of the neighbors went out and shoveled it out with a shovel and buried it on the side of the creek there. And then when I was a boy, why, there used to be a ball grounds out the White Bear, and the ball players and every spectators used to walk out along the track above the house, and they used to make a target of our pipe that went out from the stove that went out through the top of the roof. And of course that used to draw her out, and she used to chase them down the track, and that was a regular thing with Jess. She did have quite a little money to start with, but leeches around town, why, they pretty well got her cleaned of that. I remember she had a job one time cleaning up one of the bars in town here after they'd closed down. And I was talking with the proprietor one day, and I said I was just making out, and he says, well, it's all right as long as you don't leave any beer on tap. If you left any beer on tap, why, he just drank it all and was drinking up the profits there. So that's the character that Jess was. Oh, I know another time there, she always used to drag a box down. She never packed anything. She used to put everything in a box and had a piece of rope and used to drag it down the street. You could hear her coming for a block away. And one of the old timers came in town one time, and he seen her doing this, so he bought her a nice wagon, one of these wagons the boys use. He bought it to her, and yeah, she had that about one day, and she had a chance to sell it for a couple of bucks, and she sold it and was still dragging the box afterwards. Then we had another character here called Bismarck. He lived in the early days down at Patterson, and he got a name tacked onto him called Oregon John. He was a pretty well-educated man, and they tell me that he was turned down by a woman one time, and he just went to be a hermit after that. But anyway, a couple of the boys was riding some ponies down to Patterson one day, and they was riding them pretty hard, and one of them dropped dead. And this was a pretty good horse. He was a race horse, and he was called Oregon John. So they went in town to report that the horse was dead to the liver stable. When they went down to bury it, well, the horse was gone. It evidently found out that Oregon John had found the horse and had cut it up and took it home for beef. So he got the name of Oregon John. They didn't have to bury the horse. Oregon John ate it that winter. Then he moved into town here, and he took over one of the old mine shacks here. Well, in fact, it was the shaft house of the old Spitzy. I wandered in there one day, and he had an old barber chair that he'd picked up from the dump, and he had this for his bed. He just used to lay back in that. And sometimes he used to sing there, which he had a pretty good voice. He had a wonderful voice. But, oh boy, he was quite a character. I asked him one time if he wanted to cut up some wood. I had a bunch of wood up there, and I wanted to get rid of it, and I told him he could have it if he would cut it up. So he cut it up, and I thought, well, I'd give him a couple of dollars for cutting it up, getting it out of my way. And he just threw the money on the floor. He wouldn't take it. He just took off and left the wooden awl there. Finally, why, I think it is his brother that come in here and picked him up and took him away. But when he got washed up, and his old beard was all pure white when he got him cleaned up, and he was quite a respectable citizen. So that was 2 or 3 of the characters around town. We have had more, but those are the ones that stick out in my mind. Winter carnivals here was quite an event. We had big carnivals here. They used to last about a week, and there was a lot of hockey teams come here and competed for hockey. There was a Greenwood, and there was Anacortes, the town just across the creek from Greenwood, and there was Phoenix, there was Grand Forks, and numerous other teams that come in here, Weimar, Nelson, Trail. These carnivals used to last about a week, and there was hockey matches going on all day and half the night here. And the same with curling. Why, the curling was the same as this today. It was everybody get excited over curling. Then we had the big toboggan chute down Washington Street. They used to plow that out with a horse and a homemade snowplow. Then used to sprinkle a little water on it to make it icy, and used to go from Columbia Avenue right down to the bottom of Washington Street with these toboggans. They were quite long toboggans. I never did get down that. I was always too scared to go down it. But we used to go down there, and some of the fellows that had these toboggans would give you 2 bits to pull the toboggan back up the hill again. So we used to get a little money out of that. Then they had the ski racing, which was around Red Mountain. It was 5 miles around Red Mountain, and they'd start from the Bank of Montreal and go out to where the ski lift is now and around, then down around by Jumbo Creek and back through the White Bear and downtown again. That was where the ski racing was held. The ski jumping was held right at the top of Washington Street down Monte Cristo Mountain. The skiing and the ski jumping wasn't comparable to the skiing and jumping we have today. Today is more scientific, and I suppose it is a lot better, all right, but I don't know if they had as much fun out of it as we did in them days. Harvey Lynn, he used to take quite a lot of cups here. He was quite a skier in them days, and quite a hockey player too. There was sleigh races, toboggan races, cutter races, and they also had horse racing here. But there was something doing every day here for a week. There was torchlight parades, the same as we have today. They come down the mountain there and around. But there were special trains coming here to bring people in from Nelson and from the Boundary District. And the hotels in them days were taxed to capacity. We had quite a few of them then. There wasn't the hotels as we have today. In fact, they wasn't too warm at all. There was probably one stove that kept the whole hotel warm. But anyway, you didn't know any better, and there wasn't any better, so it was all right. But we did have wonderful times here at the carnival, and really used to look forward to that time, and it was an event that everybody took part in. That was the carnivals of Rossland. Oh, and then we used to have the miners' picnic, which was held in the middle of the summer. I think it was the 15th and 16th of July. This used to be held up on the old ball grounds out the Black Bear. That is where the gravel pit is the present time, or was. Anyway, that's where it was held. And then there used to be a pond out there. They used to have log rolling there. And they used to have, haul a big piece of granite in for rock drilling contest, that is hand drills. And each saloon used to have a stall of their own. There was lots of beer flying around. And they used to have a dance floor out there. The ones that wanted to dance could dance. And there was the band. We always had a local band here, pretty good band. And there was a bagpipe band. And then, of course, they used to always have midway shows come in and take part in it. So that the miners' picnic, why, it was quite an event here. Of course, there was the big parade to start it off with, and they used to march from the town out to the ballpark, which I said before was situated where the gravel pit is out the White Bear. Oh, you'd see all the young people out there, young girls out there with the long dresses, white dresses. Yeah, and the men out there with the hard hats on. Yeah, there's quite a difference in the dress today than there was in them days. The women didn't seem as though they could get skirts long enough. Today, why, they don't seem as though they can get skirts short enough. We hear them telling about the good old days. Well, I don't think that any of the younger generation has missed very much by not being back in the good old days. There were some happy moments, all right. But when I look back and see the home we had, the home we got today, there's a big difference. Home we had when we lived out the White Bear. First came here, we thought it was a pretty nice home. It was in its day. There were better homes. Some of the homes uptown were well fixed up. Even had a bathroom in, which 90% of the homes didn't have one. Even had the toilet inside the house, which used to call the WC. The majority of WCs were out in the backyard at the other end of the lot. And believe me, why, when it was down to below zero and 2 feet of snow on the ground, why, you didn't feel like trotting out to the back of the lot. Anyhow, that's enough of that. But there was a lot of things we didn't have in those good old days they talk about. We had no water. We had to pack water for about a quarter of a mile. There was always a big pot on the back of the stove filled with water to keep warm water for using around the house, around the kitchen. And the stove, it was an old cast iron stove. I remember the old folks bought a new range, a new McClary range, and it had a warming oven on. And to help a lot, it had a boiler on the side of the stove to keep about 6 gallons of water warm. That was something. That was quite an improvement. But anyway, we still had to pack water. And we decided one day, or the older brothers decided to dig a well just down the bottom of the lot. There was lots of water down there, and that tickled us kids up the back. We could play mining. That was fine. So they ringed up a windlass and a headgear to pull up the muck out this here well they was going to dig. Put a brake on the windlass, and us kids used to get on and crank up the bucket and play mine, ring a couple of bells and lower down and so on. One day we was digging down, we was down about 10 feet. My oldest brother went down to do the digging, and us kids were going to do the hoisting. I dumped the bucket of muck out and dropped it on the hook, but it missed the hook and dropped on my oldest brother down the well, flattening him out in the mud down there. Well, there was a blue streak flying then. He wanted the ladder down so he could get up. We knew if we let him up, we'd be killed. He was hoping what he was going to do to us when he got up there, but we took off. We left him down the well until somebody else come and got him out. But finally we got the well dug, and then we put in a pump, a hand pump. No such thing as electric pump them days. And I built a bit of a tank in the kitchen and put water over to the sink so we could have cold water. There was no chance of hot water. You had to ladle it out this tank we had on the back of the stove. But anyway, we used to pump that tank full. It held about, probably about 50 gallons. And two of us boys used to go down to pump it. Half the time there was a fight who was pushing the pump the right way or who wasn't pushing it. Or Anyway, it was quite a chore, but it did help a lot. We didn't have to pack water, which was quite a chore packing water. I remember one time I was packing water from the well, and we had to go up a bit of a hill. I had a neck yoke on and two of these here coal oil cans on the neck yoke. Going up, I slipped down on the ice, and of course, I got the contents of these two cans of water on top of me, and the time I got home, I was pretty near froze to death. And the only comfort I got, they said, well, I'd spoil the trail. I got water all down the trail, and it froze, and nobody else could get up there. Well, that was one of the things we had in the good old days. And then we had an old phonograph. That was the highlights of the day, the old phonograph, the old cylinder records. That was the thing. We used to get up and play that. Well, you had to jump up every 4 minutes and change the record. What you did and scratch the record and wind it up. Well, that went on all right for a while, but you got tired of playing that too. And the tones that come out of it, sure, something out of this world. Now, we never had no electric lights. No, sir, we didn't have no electric lights. We generally used to have one coil oil lamp and probably half a dozen candles. You'll probably be sitting there doing your homework by a candle, and first thing you know, somebody wanted something. They'd pick up the candle, and you was left in the dark while they went to look for what they wanted. And they'd probably bring it back, and you'd go continue on with your homework then, if you hadn't fallen asleep. We eventually got the lights in, electric lights, and that was quite a celebration on that. They had a flat rate here in them days. You paid $1 for the first light, and 2 bits for any extra lights. If you had 4 lights, if you had 4 lights, then you paid $1.50. If you had an electric iron, you paid $1 for the electric iron. Lots of people had electric iron, but they didn't pay for it. But the company had a gimmick on that too. They used to put a little fuse up on the pole. And if you blew that fuse out, they know you'd put on an extra load, and of course they'd start to investigate and find out how you blew that fuse. Till they found out why you was without lights.